So I know that it is just July, but we are here to talk about the top 5 things that you need to know as you begin to transition and start planning end of year. And I know that July is a bit early, but the reason that we're talking about this now is really because we know that direct mail starts early. We want to ensure that we're all thinking about it at the same time. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And before we go ahead and jump in, we'll just do a quick round of introductions. I think many of you know many of us, but always helpful to do a quick round. So I will start. I'm Maureen McNally, an Executive Vice President here at MissionWired. If I say Lewis Strategies, it's because I'm so used to doing that for so many years. I'm trying so hard to make the switch, and really help to oversee the nonprofit practice and ensuring that we bring the best thinking and ideas and products to all of you. And with that, I can pass it over to Orwin to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi there. My name is Stevenson. I'm a vice president here at MissionWired. I work very, very closely with Maureen on all things related to our nonprofit practice. I think I've been on a few of these webinars with some of you before, so it's nice to see you all here, but for others, it's nice to meet you. I will pass it over to David to introduce himself now.
Hi everyone, my name is David Molina. I am a senior strategist here at MissionWired. I primarily focus on lead gen and lead acquisition, so trying to get names into the door, that's I'm your guy for that.
Awesome. So with that, we can go ahead and dive right into the deck. And as I mentioned at the top, sometimes I'm still saying Lewis Strategies, but we have rebranded and we are now MissionWired, which is really exciting. I think most of you should have received an email about that. If not, you can go to our website, missionwired.com, and at the top, it will link you to a blog post that really talks all about who we are, why we decided to rebrand, what the name really means, and why. And so I won't read everything here on the slide, but I'll just call out this one little section in the middle. We're now MissionWired, a noun and an adjective, and it's really who we are, what we do, and with whom we do it. And so it really tries to encapsulate all of the work that we're doing, really alongside all of you, and making sure that we're creating a brand and name that is reflective of that. So if you have any questions about that, definitely let us know. You can feel free to send any of us an email if you want. But at the end of the day, the work that we're doing, the partners that we are doing it with, none of that changes. It really is just we are changing the title, the name on all of our doors that we are now sitting in the different offices for, and really trying to make sure that we are representing the work that we do with all of you. So with that, I can pass it over to Orwin to talk a little bit about the next few slides.
Great. Thanks, Maureen. As we sort of mentioned, we have 5 things here for you that we would like to chat through as to help you better plan for end of year. And the first thing that we want to talk about is finalizing your theme or themes for end of year. As Maureen mentioned at the top of the presentation, really the reason we're talking about this in July is because of some of the longer lead marketing channels that are already preparing and finalizing all of their materials. Namely, the biggest complement to digital tends to be direct mail, and those those programs take a lot longer to set up for a variety of IRL reasons, right? You have to get all the postage and the printing and everything done to have those mailed. So a lot of our nonprofit clients that we work with on the digital side are working with direct mail vendors that are also working on those things. So first and foremost, if you don't have a theme already, you should be trying to finalize that right now. Some of our clients might already be finalizing their end of year plans for direct mail, while others are more in the stage of drafting copy and things like that. So this might still be an opportunity for you to insert a theme or a concept for your end of year campaign that works across channels, not just direct mail and digital, but also for your other channels that you might be engaging with and other fundraisers that you might have. You can insert a theme with your major gift officers for your corporate partnerships and just make sure everyone is sort of speaking the same language. The other thing that you'll want to focus on is with your theme is how those campaigns are going to fit within digital. Specifically thinking about how how the need for creative is so much greater for digital, right? We send many more emails than we do mail pieces. We send more pieces of advertising creative across the internet than you send out proposals for corporate partnerships and things like that. So what you'll want to do is make sure that you have enough content, like a theme that can provide for the amount of content that you want for the organization's concept, that will also have key moments that you can align with across those other channels. So some of the things that we might like to do, even if a lot of what direct mail is doing doesn't align perfectly with our digital campaign, we like to take a few moments throughout the end of year campaign to really integrate and align for a specific thing. That might be in the lead up to Giving Tuesday. It might be in the final mail package that is going out that's supposed to hit home right at the very end of the year. We want to make sure that those types of things align with what we're doing in digital. And then finally, we want to make sure that you have a North Star throughout your whole organization. I know there's, themes can look very, very different for every nonprofit. So there's a few examples that we would like to chat through for what this could look like. Here we go. I used to work at the International Rescue Committee, and one of the things that we did in our end of year creative was a really visual identity that helped tie together our entire end of year campaign. So you see these yellow horizontal or diagonal lines here. This was a design treatment specific to our end of year campaign a couple years ago. So this made its way into email, it made its way into display advertising, it made its way into some of our direct mail pieces. We also had a theme, but really we just wanted to make sure that visually things started to look the same. So even if what we were talking about in direct mail might have been different from what we were talking about in digital, everything looked very much like it was part of the same campaign. Some other organizations like UNICEF USA relies less on a design treatment and more on a tagline. So every year UNICEF USA comes up with a tagline or a catchphrase that they put at the bottom of their emails. They layer it into some of their direct mail pieces and other parts of their marketing collateral, where in this last year they had "Together we won't stop fighting for children," and that made its way everywhere. It made everything feel like one cohesive campaign. But even if you don't have a design treatment and maybe you don't have a tagline, you might just have a broader topic. For the USO, we put together a theme for this last end of year that was really related to COVID, but really what you're starting to see here in this photo is cold weather in winter. So it really thematically ties everything together, but we really tried to make sure that everyone during end of year, direct mail, digital, etc., was talking about the same thing. So in this way, the theme wasn't a tangible design or look and feel. It wasn't a tagline. It was more of just a concept that we were all talking about the same types of things. That's a bit of a lot of information. So I saw more and more people entering the webinar over the last couple minutes. So if you have any questions at all, like Maureen said at the beginning, feel free to stop us, interject, ask some questions, toss it in the chat, etc. But number one, at this point in the game, you should be finalizing, working to finalize, or have just finalized a theme, whatever that means for your organization, that can help tie your end of year campaign together. One of the things that we like to say here in our approach to integrated marketing, that integration itself is a bit like eating a fish. Right? You take what nourishes you, but you don't choke on the bones. We don't need everything to be the exact same across all of our channels. We just want it to look of the same piece. When you walk into a McDonald's in the US or in Japan or in Italy, those McDonald's all look the same, but there are slightly different things on the menu. You're not confused that it is a McDonald's, but there are things that are different for each of them. So I think it makes a lot of sense for you to take what you can to tie all of these things together, but don't try to force it so much that you're not going to be able to optimize with each of your channels. There we go. Sorry.
And I'm not sure this is a question that came in from what about the strategy of going into year end budgeting and each other and drilling down their messaging?
Oh, great. That's a great question, Giselle. It actually, does it tie into our next point? I think it kind of does. So My answer to Giselle's question here, which is you have a bunch of different themes that you want to test against each other in end of year, you should absolutely do that. But one of the things that you should be doing right now as well, maybe if you're trying to decide on what theme to choose or something, you should be looking at conducting a mid-year review. And at this point, what we're really looking at is the first 6 months of the calendar year, but also last end of year. You should be drawing all of your lessons. You should be dusting off those notes from Q4 or whatever quarter your fiscal year is, really October through December. Look at those reports, see what worked, what didn't work last year. You'll want to pull all of your end of year test results from last year and anything else that you did this year, and then also conduct that mid-year review. So as you're setting your strategy right now, this is the part where you might identify a couple different themes that you might want to use during end of year. And as we said in our last webinar, and as we will say always, you should always be testing. So if you are trying to decide right now what theme to use, Giselle, I would say you should bake that into a testing plan, preferably earlier in the end of year season as possible. In some cases, you might be able to test some of those concepts or themes out in September and October. But if your hypothesis is that cold weather creative is going to work better in December, that's going to be kind of hard to talk about in August or September, right? Because it's not cold outside, maybe that hypothesis wouldn't really work to test. So there is a way that you can test some of these themes against each other, I would say in November. That might give you enough time to do some like rapid response, tweaking your creative. I would also just advise that as you are setting up your strategy for right now, that you, if you are going to go this route of testing multiple themes, that you create your strategy in such a way that you can easily swap out different pieces of creative. So you don't want to have to rewrite all of your emails in the second half of December because you have a different theme. You should write those emails in such a way that really you might be able to swap out a graphic, which will be a much easier, an easier thing to change, or you might swap out a tagline, in which case you're only modifying a line or two of copy. Those are the kinds of things that you would want to create the skeleton of your plan to help with the testing results that you get. But back to your mid-year review, we have a couple examples of what we might look at in a mid-year review here. This is one of my favorite slides that we conducted for one of our clients after looking at the 2020 end of year campaign results. And one of the questions that we had was, how long does it actually take to convert a lead into a donor? So someone that makes their way onto our email list. And what we found in 2020 was that it took on average about 72 days and 13 emails to convert a donor, which is much better than the previous year in 2019. But this has really big implications for this specific client in the way that we are approaching our end of year strategy. So what we know right now, for example, and we'll get into in just a couple minutes, our acquisition plans, our lead generation plans for the entire year are sort of pivoting based on this key insight that we uncovered. Now we're looking at this very critically right now as we are setting our end of year plan, but we also know that if it's going to take 72 days to convert a new donor, then like acquiring a bunch of new names in December might not make a ton of sense because they might not convert or yield the results that we want for our end of year campaign. So we're really starting to put a lot of emphasis on our acquisition efforts in August, September, and October so that we give them enough time to convert. This is an example of the type of questions you should be asking. Asking yourself right now, maybe you asked these types of questions in January when you were looking over your 2020 end of year results. But regardless, you should be going back over your data. We're updating this right now for this specific client to see how these timeframes may have changed over the first 6 months of 2021. But you'll want to conduct all of this type of analysis right now. It's a really nice time in the middle of the year to sort of take stock of all of the insights that you have and to help inform your future strategy, much like Giselle's question here about different types of themes and how you could layer that in to your end of year campaign. This is the time where you're looking at your data. In the next couple of weeks, we're setting that strategy. And then we're using these types of insights to really inform how we're creating that end of year plan at a more granular level. Along with all of that, as we sort of talked about already, review all of your testing results, everything from last end of year, as well as everything that you've been testing over the course of the first half of the year. And also, if you remember back to our last webinar from last month, the summer is really the right time to be testing a lot of the big picture hypotheses that can inform your end of year campaign. So if you already have some test results from June, from July, like you should be layering all of those into your end of year plans. That's our point about hot test summer. It's not quite over. You can still use those insights in August and September. And never stop. This is the point that we're going to come up on almost every single slide. You never stop testing. You never stop doing anything. Always be testing. We even like to test and optimize during end of year, but we start to pivot away from the big structural programmatic hypotheses that we're testing over the summer to smaller optimizations during end of year. So I prefer to focus on things that are going to be working and boosting results in the short term during end of year, whereas in the summer, we like to focus on the really big picture stuff. But all of that should be leading into how you create your calendar for the year. So our third point is create your calendar. Once you have your theme identified, once you have your strategy set based on all of the data you've reviewed for end of year, you want to actually put pen to paper, look at your calendar, identify what you're going to be doing. This in itself is part creative, an exercise on creative, but it's really an exercise on strategy as well. The very first thing that I tell all of our clients to do, and that we work with our clients to do, is to look at your projections, look at what your goal for end of year is. If we have an email program that we're working on and we need to raise $1 million, at this point, we should know how many emails that $1 million is going to take, right? In order to raise $1 million, we might have to send 30 emails during end of year based on projections from last year and what we know is going to increase with competition moving forward. Once we've identified that number of emails, we're going to have to cluster our calendar strategically. If you do need to send 30 or 40 emails over the course of November and December, and some of our clients send more than that, right? It's going to be really difficult to send all of those emails between December 26th and December 31st. That's not a good experience for anyone. So what we like to do is cluster all these things around your big tentpole moments, and we create our own moments. But the first thing is identifying how many emails, how many pieces of creative you actually need, how many ad sets you need, and then build your campaigns around that into these clusters. And then, as I sort of mentioned, consider the competition. We see these types of charts here on the right every year, where we look at the average number of emails deployed at any given point in time. On Giving Tuesday, we're reaching like a critical mass. There's only so many emails that you can fit into Giving Tuesday on the day. And during that final stretch of the year, those final 5 days, every year people are sending more and more email. So if you think that you can just do what you did last year in terms of email volume, that might not get you to your goal. It might, but we are sort of anticipating that it won't. And so we want to add a couple more emails in there at all of these key moments. But also, because they're so concentrated and saturated at this point, we want to make sure that we are layering emails and ads and other parts of our digital campaigns throughout the end of year calendar as well. Are there any questions about calendaring or how we go about all of this? Super. So now you have basically you've chosen your theme. You have started to look at all of your data, you've set your strategy, you've identified what you need to do, the number of emails, you started to cluster these into strategic campaigns throughout the course of November and December. And then you're off to your creative implementation where you're getting all of your writers and designers to create all of those things, or you're working with your agency to do all of those things. The fourth point here then is actually putting it together. This is still a third point, sorry about that. So our third point, we like to use an email grid that looks a bit like this. When you're putting pen to paper, here's how we sort of break this down. This is where we start to layer in what time we're going to be sending these, what the sender name is, what the subject line is going to be, the key theme for each of these things. And then we'll use this to sort of guide our creative folks into writing all of this. But we put all of this in a spreadsheet. Some folks like to use different platforms. There are a ton of calendaring platforms out there. We have some opinions about some of them if any of you have questions about them. But we often think that, or often find that a good old spreadsheet is really nice for tracking all of the various emails. So we end up putting all of these into a calendar, includes all of the relevant details that you want, and then it's off to the races for actually writing and drafting these. Great. I think that's enough talking for me. I think I'm going to pass it over to David to take our next section now.
Yeah. As Orwin alluded to a couple of times earlier, right now is the time to really think about how you are investing in your acquisition programs. So the first bullet that we have here is to continue to build your list. We find that really adding names now it's what going to contribute to your end of year plan. So not only are you able to get them in the door sooner and get them used to your program a little bit sooner, but if you are talking about even your payback windows, you're giving them every opportunity between now and the end of year to give as much as they can, which also impacts how much they raise at the end of the year. So as long as you can get people used to your content, you're more likely to convert those folks down the line as you start to increase your volume with them at the end of the year around a really big moment. The next thing that I would touch upon here is make sure you're seeking the most cost-effective driver of list growth. And so I think this really stems from making sure that you're acquiring not only the right names, but at the right price. So Facebook has been very up and down over the last year, especially in the nonprofit space, where some folks have to use a disclaimer because of the nature of what the nonprofit is, while others didn't. So you were probably off some point between November and January due to the election, forcing Facebook to take down some of those ads that really help grow the list. However, in more recent updates, we've seen that all the new iOS updates on Facebook leading to just softer performance overall, which are really driving costs up. In addition to that, the way that the pandemic is affecting people's screen time right now, as more people start to go out, there are less people behind the phones, which is also driving costs up, in addition to the iOS changes that are just driving much softer performance. And so a couple of things that we recommend are maybe taking a look at YouTube. YouTube is still very underutilized in the acquisition space right now. I know that the cost to start up is a little bit high, especially if you don't have the biggest acquisition budget. So it does take a little bit of time to test it out, see, and give it a little bit of time to run. However, we've found that YouTube names have actually performed very strongly despite a slightly higher CPA than we have seen historically from Facebook and some of our other fixed cost sources. Another channel or our acquisition source that we have been utilizing a lot over the last year has been Advantage AI, which is our fixed cost acquisition model that really brings in really strong performance from a lot of the people we add to the list. And I think over the last year, we've seen all our nonprofits acquire really great people that have contributed immediately with really short payback windows. So we've been leaning a lot into that, and something to lean into that as you continue to grow your list now. The last point I'd like to touch upon here is reactivation. And so sometimes acquiring people doesn't mean you necessarily have to go out into the world and get people added to your list. Sometimes it's reacquiring the people that already exist. So a great example or that people like to use, it's essentially you are shopping in your own closet, where you're identifying people who are most likely to contribute again if you just bring them back onto the list. So something to think about now is how you are treating those people in the time right now, so that you have plenty of time to get them reactivated onto your list and re-engaged with your emails coming into the end of the year to get them back up to speed and hopefully drive a contribution there. We also offer a reactivation model that we've seen be a really good driver of success, not only in off-peak moments now during the summer, but as you get closer to end of year, where those people are getting flooded with a bunch of asks, and we've seen just reactivating them on our existing lists have really helped drive those end of year donations.
David, can you in our last webinar, I think we talked a little bit about the upcoming Apple changes in September that are going to affect the way that email might work. Do you have any thoughts or opinions about how and why we should be reactivating now, considering the changes that might be affecting open rates in the future?
Oh yeah, I think as So as some of this data becomes like essentially that, from my understanding, will wipe away some data that essentially that we need now in order to really get you the best model possible. And so if you're using the existing data now, will definitely help you reactivate these people a lot easier. As soon as you start taking away data and different data points that are most likely to help you identify who those are more likely to convert are, you start to put yourself in a position where you're taking a little bit more of a guesswork approach to who you think is actually going to be a good person to reactivate. And so as those changes get implemented in the near future, definitely getting on as much as you can, getting done as much as you can now is a much stronger thing to do in the moment as opposed to doing it later when that data is gone.
Right. So we might have, like, the Apple changes are going to affect the utility or value of open data and open rates, right, after September. So while we have really robust modeling through Advantage AI that we can use other factors and other models and things to help us figure out who is best to reactivate. If you weren't using Advantage AI or something like that, if you were just trying to reactivate your inactive leads, you're saying it's going to be harder to do that after the middle of December, whenever this change goes into place, because you won't have as reliable or consistent data on opens. So if you were hoping to do something with that, then maybe Advantage AI or one of our reactivation models would be of particular value before September or before the middle of September, right?
Yep, 100%. I think in any case, the more data you have on people, it's just easier to identify. As you take any data point away, you take away a lot of the certainty there.
Yeah, and I think our data scientists are currently working on updating our own models and trying to figure out how to adjust and modify for these upcoming changes. I don't know that we have those updates yet, but maybe in our next webinar, we'll be able to talk about some of the things that they're doing to account for some of that lost open data that we're anticipating. Is that right, Maureen?
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Sorry for interrupting. I was just like, oh, that's an interesting point. We should talk about that because it does affect timing for reactivation this year more so than in previous years because of those limitations coming from Apple. Sorry for interrupting.
No, as a great point to interrupt there, really important. Continuing on this activation trend, the first thing that I would like to touch upon beyond just where you're activating, but always testing. I know Oren alluded to it earlier. I think the advantage to being on paid media is that you're always able to test at different points of your flow. So whether it be on your donation page, some kind of survey upsell, but also on the front end on their content, right? Where we are constantly shifting both the graphics that we use on Facebook, a video that we have on YouTube, the copy that we have on Facebook, or even copy or images you can use on YouTube, making sure you're always optimizing and testing now. Of course, you'll test end of year as well, but I think right now is a good opportunity to take really strong learnings now, apply them to the end of year, and that way you're optimizing your tests overall. If a test performs really strong now, you can make some variant of it in December and hopefully drive stronger growth. So I think everyone understands the always testing, but just a reminder, testing is great to do and just to drive your results up. I think I missed the question here. Oh, no, that was Orwin, I'm sorry. The next point here is plan for a mountain of creative. And so what we mean by this is kind of similar to the email. It's just making sure you're prepared ahead of time to get whatever creative you want to get up ready to go. So I know that this involves some of your cross-channel creative. So if you have any messaging that you want to use from different channels or different teams across your organization, making sure that you're all connected there and you have those approvals ahead of time. Speaking from a person who's works a lot in the execution time, the more time you give us to do some of the execution, the easier it is to get them up, because not only do we have to execute and double check and make sure everything's working fine, but there's also, regardless of the platform you're working through, some level of approvals process that you have to go through. So Facebook is fairly quick about it within 24 hours. If you're using a native network, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Search is within minutes, but just making sure you're giving people plenty of time so that when the day comes that you have to turn them on, it's just putting a switch as opposed to getting hundreds of ads up at the very last minute. Also, doing so gives you the advantage of letting each platform learn. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube, the more time you give the algorithms to learn and to serve, you tend to find that the performance is a little bit better because then you can optimize whether you can turn specific versions off, you can turn on other versions, or you can optimize a little bit better so that when you're really getting to your peak moments, it's your best creative up. And then the last thing on this point,
David, if I can interrupt for 1 second, I would also note that when you're thinking about the creative, and this really goes for any channel, especially digital, thinking about your brand and your mission and what moments might arise leading up to and during end of year. And so I know that there's a bunch of organizations that are on right now that do some direct response. Knowing that as we go into end of year, it also means that we're going into a season where there might be hurricanes or wildfires and that sort of thing. And so I think it's also just being ready with content that can speak to a lot of different moments, to David's point, to really ensure that that is created and approved and ready to go, to give the biggest bulk of the time to those that are then executing to ensure that there's no problems at that point.
And if we're going to bring this all full circle yet again, make sure that if you have already chosen a theme, or remember back to that first point, you should pick a theme or a visual device or something that is flexible enough that allows you to do rapid response moments if you do have to change out themes or creative or anything that Maureen just mentioned. You want to make sure that you have a theme that is flexible enough to handle all of that, and that if an emergency happens in the middle of December, you don't have to get rid of your entire theme in order to respond to that moment. Great. Sorry, David, we're just like interrupting you left, right, and center here.
No, all great points. The last thing I think I would like to add here is just having a couple of contingency plans ready to go. I know that the nonprofit space, we are constantly working with a ton of matches. And so, so if you have a match and you think you're going to hit it fairly quickly and you had it up on your paid social, making sure you have backup plans ready to go. So when you turn those off, you have ads immediately ready to go there. The last thing you want to do is turn anything off in a peak moment. So just making sure you have things revved up, and I cannot stress that enough, because at every minute that you're off, or really turns into every hour that you're off, you are missing a prime opportunity where others are actually raising in that same space. And then our last point here is preparing your auxiliary paid media channels, which is really getting ready to go. In the nonprofit space, display advertising is really big, so making sure you're taking advantage of the Google Display Network, since that has a more cost-effective way to get your ads and into the market, in addition to just they advertise everywhere. So you really have this blast moment of hitting people with an ad or with your specific ad. And then the last thing here is, I think something that's really big as everyone starts to go on search, especially around end of year, is your search bidding. So historically, there's some nonprofits that have essentially a gentleman's agreement where they promise not to target on each other's keywords. However, we've seen more recently that that's not always the case. So be prepared to essentially have a little bit of a bidding spar there, where you are running on people's search terms, or some people are running on your search terms, and then making adjustments on the fly there. We do see that the costs do tend to go up in general around EOY as more people are just on the search networks. However, making sure you're optimizing your own keywords and pausing things that absolutely are not working, and making bid adjustments to the things especially on your own search terms, like your nonprofit name, so that you are always at the top, or if not as close to the top as possible. So you are driving those clicks over to your site as opposed to someone else's site.
Great. I think that brings us to the final point here, our fifth point of the 5 things you should be doing for end of year right now. I know that this is probably the most innovative thing you've ever read, but make some decisions, right? What we mean by this is like it's now the point where we're starting to turn plans into action, and there are a number of slightly more administrative decisions that need to be made now, and you might not be able to make them later. So first, we want to talk about your channels, right? We're getting to the point at the end of July here where you sort of need to make a decision about whether you want to open up new channels. This is probably the latest that we might want to stand up an SMS program. And as a lot of folks have found over the past couple of years, SMS is in many ways the new email when it comes to digital fundraising. It is still an emerging channel, but it has matured quite a bit over the past 4 to 8 years. And as a result of the past couple election cycles, presidential election cycles, I should say. So we see more and more nonprofits getting into the SMS game. If you want to stand that up, we're more than happy to help you figure out how to do that, but you will need to get some phone numbers. You will need to stand up potentially a new tech platform to handle SMS, et cetera. You might need more internal procedures and things. So there's like some administrative stuff that you'll need to do as you want to break into a channel like SMS. Same thing goes for peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer can be SMS peer-to-peer, but it could also be a whole slew. There are like cottage industries around peer-to-peer. So, this is sort of the last chance that you might be able to do that for the benefits of end of year 2021. You can certainly stand up these kinds of channels later if, we just don't know or couldn't guarantee that you're going to reap all the benefits of those channels during end of year December, which tends to be the most ROI positive time of year for all marketing channels or any direct response channels, which isn't to say that you can't do this in the winter or after end of year or anything like that. Other paid media channels here as well, as David alluded to, breaking into YouTube. I don't know if you want to get started on YouTube in the middle of November. So if you want to do that, make a decision now, start planning for it, get it on the books, get all the resources and processes for all of your channels. And we do recommend exploring all of these, but like I said, you got to make that decision sooner rather than later. Next up, money. Money is one of the biggest things for all of our nonprofit clients, and we don't want you to have any money problems. And what we mean by this specifically is you should be securing all of your match funds right now. I can't tell you the number of times we've walked into November or December not sure if we have enough match funds to cover Giving Tuesday or the final stretch of the year or something like that. We all know that matches work. We all want matches during these critical moments where we're sort of like already in a match arms race. There are organizations that have 3x, 5x, 10x matches out there. So if you do want to participate in that, if you do want match money, you should be talking to your development team. You should be talking to your major gift officers. You should be trying to secure all of that and make sure you have a plan for how you're going to get that match money in the door. Similarly, this is something that not a ton of folks have front of mind, but your cash flow and your invoices. There is nothing worse than getting to the middle of December and realizing if you're running your ads on a credit card, right? Some of our clients might have everything put on like one of those impossible credit cards with like a very, very high limit. If you're reaching that limit in the middle of December and you want to keep going, you're going to have to figure out what that looks like to get more money. Or if you need your invoices paid so that you maybe you're doing a pass-through for some of your digital advertising and it's going to an agency, and you get to the middle of December, critical time, and all of that money has been used and your next invoice hasn't been processed, you don't want your ads to go dark because there's no more money there. So make sure that you have all of the cash flow problems or issues sorted out right now. Make sure that you have your finance team is aware and prepared to act on anything related to your credit card statements, related to invoices. Make sure that, if this has already been budgeted for, make sure that the money is going where it needs to go on like a really practical level. So I can't emphasize this enough, especially when it comes to your paid media program. You don't want to like run into any problem where you're dark at any point in December because you have the money that's already been budgeted is no longer where you thought it was supposed to be, or anything like that. And then finally, the other big thing that we like to touch on here is the coordination that an end of year campaign takes. We are digital specialists, we are digital natives, we run big digital programs, it's our bread and butter. But digital is just one component of a successful nonprofit fundraising program, right? This is end of year isn't just big for digital. It isn't just big for direct response and marketing. It is big for frontline fundraisers, for major gift departments, for principal gifts. It's a really big part of everything. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that all of our nonprofit clients are creating campaigns, maybe led by digital, but certainly where digital is an important and critical part, that is informative and helpful for all of these other teams. So you want to make sure that if there's anything that you're doing on digital, that a major gift officer can walk into a meeting in December and show their donors all the cool work that you're doing. Why not do that, right? Make sure that your major gift officers know about the work you're doing. Make sure the people writing grants know about the work that you're doing. Make sure that you are coordinating with all of these folks on the corporate teams to ensure that they can pitch corporate partners successfully with all of the great materials that you guys are making. And the reason that I think that this falls a lot on digital, as I mentioned at the very beginning, because digital requires so much more content and creative than all of these other programs. So you are going to be making or writing many more emails. You're going to be writing many more pages of content for your website. You're going to be writing all sorts of different things for your advertising. Like, that is content and that is creative that all these other teams can use. And it will help make a cohesive end of year campaign for everyone that hopefully, there's some saying about rising tides and boats lifting, whatever that saying is. I'm terrible with these things. That, is driven by digital. So I want to make sure that you guys are having those conversations. Let people know now, let people know in July, let them know in August what your plans are, that you're going to be doing a ton of stuff, and let them, take your materials to help their programs. So, and then maybe they'll help you more. We just want to make sure that you are coordinating across all of your teams. You're a singular nonprofit. You're not just a digital team at a nonprofit. So please go forth and coordinate with everyone. And I think that should about wrap up our 5 big critical points that we think you should be doing right now for end of year. With that, if anyone is still around, you are more than welcome to ask us anything, and I'm sure we can try to find some answers for you, or you can email us at nonprofit@missionwired.com. So we have about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any questions that they haven't jotted down in the chat, feel free to come off mute, come off video. We're going to stick around for 10 minutes or so. We can talk amongst ourselves, or you guys can chat and ask us some questions.
Hi guys, I don't want to keep asking questions, although I will, because this is really helpful. Yeah, so just wanted to get your sense of, I mean, every year we sort of head into this period. What do you think is different this year? Is there, like, what are the dynamics that you see going into it? What would, sort of do we have headwinds? Do we not? As you mentioned, last year was sort of, we were coming out of, well, we were still in COVID and we had an election. So this year, what are you guys feeling?
Ooh, such a good, difficult question, Giselle. We're feeling a lot of things right now. I think there's a lot of anticipation and there's a lot of uncertainty that we're facing. So one, we are tightening up our plans as much as possible to avoid any of those things. I wish I could predict the future. I wish I could say, whatever. So I can't, but I'm happy to speculate with you guys about what we might be anticipating. I think we have seen nonprofit fundraising through the election and through most of the pandemic was pretty strong for many organizations. For those that had a very, whose mission is like not in the same ballpark as any of these things, I think we saw a few sort of, not perform quite as well as expected. But by and large, I think giving was was really high last year, and certainly through the first half of 2021. I mentioned all of these mid-year reviews that we're doing. We're looking at a lot of the performance of our clients in the first half of the year. Seems to be pretty strong. For more than a few nonprofit friends and clients that we've been engaging with and talking to, the past couple months have been a little tougher than usual. And what my sense is, my guess, is that a lot of people, after spending a year and a half inside, are really excited to be outside. And after depending on your political affiliations, I would assume 4 years of a lot of fundraising and a lot of activism, I think some people might be feeling a little tired and burnt out. And so I think that this has been a softer summer for a number of folks. And so I think that has made some folks nervous about the fall and end of year. I think what we have seen in all of the data over the past 10, 15 years, and these big moments, these critical elections, these really, I feel like every year there's a new report saying how philanthropic giving has shot through the roof, or we broke new records every year. And one of the things that every time we have one of these big moments, whether it's an election, it's a recession, or a new tax bill, everyone's like, how's this going to affect fundraising? And we break another record and we break another record. Right now, the evidence doesn't suggest to us that we are in for a disastrous or a down end of year giving season. I think this summer, when we look back at it, we might find that this summer has challenging for a lot of folks, but I think that's because people are trying to do more because they haven't been able to. I think I just read a report that June or July of 2021 flights in the US, it was greater than it was in 2019 during the same time period. So like more people are flying in July 2021 than they were 2 years ago before the pandemic, right? I think that's a trend that we're starting to see this summer. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of folks were having down summers, but I have no reason to believe that this end of year giving season, we're going to see the generosity of donors disappear. And so we are trying to build up as much content as we can for all of our clients. We are building our strategies and plans to have contingencies in case something happens, in case we do find partway through end of year that maybe the generosity still isn't there. What are the things that we could be doing to inspire folks? I think we're going to be more competitive. I think that nonprofit world every year gets more and more competitive. So we are trying to face that competition and make sure that we are standing out for our clients with really hard-hitting creative. But I don't know how much of that is an actual answer, Giselle. I'm sort of just like talking through all of the things that I'm thinking about and that we are proactively thinking about for our clients as we head into this year. I hope that I'm right. I hope that like Q4 isn't going to be some really big down year, and there are plenty of our clients and friends that haven't experienced a downturn. And there are some that have seen some softer results this summer, right? And I think that's to be expected considering where the collective state of all of us, all of our like families and people are at the current point in time. Maureen, anyone else? Is there something that you guys want to weigh in on?
Yeah, I would add one thing here, and then think that I can jump in, but one thing to note is that as we're looking at the numbers for this year end, pay attention to what you raised in 2020 as well as in 2019. I think a lot of organizations are looking at 2020 and saying, okay, how can we continue to increase from there by 10%? That's definitely the goal, whatever that increase would be. But also look at 2019 for additional trends and sort of as like a path forward, where if you don't hit 2020 numbers, again, I hope everybody does hit that if not surpass them, but really paying attention to where you were pre-pandemic and you did see a massive spike due to the pandemic. So I think it's important context to, especially this year, not just pay attention to last year, but the past 2 years.
Thank you.
And then David, I saw you come off of mute. Did you want to jump in?
No, I think it was just kind of stressing a little bit of what Orton was saying in terms of like particularly this summer right now, where do agree is definitely an overcorrection of things that people couldn't do over the last year. So we're definitely seeing just and the direct response advertising space just increased costs because there are less people behind the screen than there were at this time last year, which is also a very opposite, right? There are almost 150% or 50% more people online at the same time. And so I think as we get to the fall and people aren't traveling as much, I think there's still going to be increased traveling through the holidays. However, just keeping that in mind, and it might be a little bit more of a competitive space, trying to reach the same number of eyes, despite having less people behind the screen.
Thank you.
Thanks for the tough question, Giselle. Always looking toward the future. I appreciate it. It seems like we have about 2 minutes left. Or if there are any other questions, we're happy to field them, or we could start our farewells.
All right, I'll jump in when we're done. But if anyone else has a question, just please speak, because I don't want to. Well, okay, but if anyone doesn't, the other thing I would love to ask you guys is, you talked about matches and the sort of escalation of matches and this match, whatever, war. I mean, 5x matches, 6x, you know, how are we supposed to take this? I mean, is it becoming like you have to have a match, otherwise you're not even there? Or like, where does this stop? Where does the escalation and the tactic become, you know, just generic and pointless?
Mm-hmm. Giselle, I would respond to that, I think, with a question of my own. If you think in your email inbox right now to the consumer brands you follow, let's pretend it's J.Crew. How annoyed are you at receiving a 30%, a 40%, a 50% off email? I would say if we look to the consumer industry, the brand industry as any indication, one, I think those discounts are getting bigger or have gotten bigger perhaps over the past 20 years. I have zero evidence to suggest that that's actually the case, but I'm just thinking about all the flash sales that you receive, that's like whatever. But I don't think that a lot of that has harmed the industry in general. Like, I don't know, like, they're still doing it. I think they're even further ahead in advertising in general than the nonprofit space is. So I would say, one, should we be concerned? I don't think we should be not concerned. But two, the reason that I'm not totally freaking out about it is because we see all of these big discounts still work so well in the consumer brand space. And I think psychologically, it is pretty similar when you receive an email from your favorite brand that is like 50% off, and you're like, yeah, I will buy that thing. Now, what that sort of means, though, is that I'm not going to buy it full price. Like, I'm never going to respond to an email from J.Crew that's like, would you like to spend, you know, full price for this item? Like, rarely, maybe sometimes, but if I know next week you're going to send me an email with a coupon, then I'm going to go and wait for the coupon. And I think that's the state that we are at with a lot of our nonprofits, that we have trained nonprofit audiences to anticipate a match, which means if you don't have a match, it's basically like receiving an email from your favorite brand that's like, hey, do this thing. Sometimes that works if they have a cool new product. Like Apple doesn't really have those big 50% off things. They're just like, hey, here's this new flashy thing. Psychologically, I think it's sort of the same, but we don't have the same type of things to offer our supporters by and large. You know, sometimes it's a big new capital campaign. We're building a new building. We are starting up a new program. We are opening a new country office. Those types of things you might be able to do without a match or without any type of thing or any other additional incentive. But if you're just looking for like a standard campaign, those matches are more and more prevalent. But in our testing, I haven't seen, Maureen might have to correct me here, I haven't seen a ton of data to suggest like a huge improvement between some of those different amounts. I think there are some results that like a 10x match is definitely better than a regular match, but like how much better is a 10x match to a 5x match? Like, I don't know if that's like a big deal. I think it is just the fact that you're seeing something that is different from a regular match.
Yeah, I think the one time where I think it's kind of would be a bigger deal compared to 5x was really the Activity Tuesday, where everybody was talking about a match. So to use the J. Crew example, it's really who has the biggest sale. And that's it's hard, right? Because it's for all of us, I think it sometimes feels a little fake. But you know, I think it works, and so it is one of those things that, you know, I'm getting to say a double your gift sometimes doesn't.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I don't mind getting those, the 50% off, you know, Banana Republic.
Yeah. Yeah, I always try to like remind myself of what the consumer market is doing when we're doing things like this, or when we're faced with these types of questions, because I think they have done a lot of the work of training your behaviors. So I know that I am trained by the J. Crews and the brands that I follow, and that is affecting my behavior as I consume nonprofit brands as well. Because the way that I use my inbox, the way that I archive emails, the way that I do everything in my inbox, the way that I look at Instagram ads, for example, like all of that is built up, and I've been trained by the consumer brands. And if we are asserting nonprofits into that same space, we're asserting them into the same psychology of people that are already trained by those brands as well. So I always try to keep that in mind when faced with those types of questions, notwithstanding like the moral, ethical questions or anything like that about whether and how we should be doing some of the things that we're doing, is sort of a different conversation, maybe for a different webinar.
Right, not for the money webinar.
Yeah. Yes. Alrighty. Thank you for all the excellent questions, Giselle, and folks. I think we are a little bit over on time, so we will go ahead and say our farewells now. We do have another webinar planned for next month. I don't have the details off the top of my head, but if you are subscribed to our newsletter, then you will get all of those notifications, or in upcoming email, we will explain all of the good stuff that we're doing in our next webinar in August. So stay tuned for that. And otherwise, thank you all very, very much for joining us on this webinar. I appreciate it. Thanks, folks. Bye.